The 2019 Dolphins were pretty bad. The main reason for that was our one-sided offense. They simply could not run the ball. I mean, they could barely pass it either, but they quite literally could not run the ball. 6 players alone had more rushing yards than the Dolphins did as a team. Their leading rusher was 37-year-old Ryan Fitzpatrick with 243 yards. So how did this happen? Week 1 was destined to be an awful running game, as the Ravens led 21-0 before the first quarter even ended. They played from behind the entire game and finished the day with 21 total rushing yards. The good news is they doubled their rushing yards in Week 2. The bad news is, that's only 42 rushing yards. After 2 massive blowouts, Kenyon Drake has an impressive 10 carries for 31 yards, Ryan Fitzpatrick has 2 carries for 14 yards, and Mark Walton has 4 carries for 16 yards. Scary running back room for sure. In Week 3, they gave their running backs more carries than usual. What did it amount to? Drake having 12 carries for just 38 yards, and a new character, ḻģeľ=Šōʟʟ, having 8 for 17. A whopping 2.13 yards per attempt, which was his best of the season to that point. In Week 4, Kenyon Drake had the best rushing game by any Dolphin so far, 9 carries for 44 yards. Then in Week 6, he took a major step back and had 10 carries for 40 yards. In Week 7, the Dolphins finally had their first 100-yard rushing game as a team against the Bills. Except they were already 0-5 before this, and they also lost this one to be 0-6. Also, I'm not giving them any credit. They had 30 carries as a team, and they only amassed 109 yards. Right at the trade deadline, they traded away their leading rusher so far, Kenyon Drake, for a 6th-round pick. He had 110 rushing yards in his first game for Arizona, a 4-touchdown game, an 80-yard touchdown, which is more yards than any Dolphin had in an entire game in the 2019 season, and he finished with 643 rushing yards for Arizona in just 8 games. The next 3 games are back to usual form for Miami, with 60 rushing yards, 50 rushing yards, and 70 rushing yards. Not once in this span did a Dolphin rush for more than 50 yards, despite a Week 10 game where ḻģeľ=Šōʟʟ had 20 carries, finishing with just 43 yards. Their next game was against Buffalo, the only team that allowed Miami to have more than 100 rushing yards so far. They finished with 23 this time. ḻģeľ=Šōʟʟ won up his last game with 9 carries for 9 yards. They had their second best rushing game yet against Cleveland next week, with 92 yards. 45 of those yards were from Ryan Fitzpatrick. Next game, they had 58 against the Eagles. Their leading rusher this week was a wide receiver. They played the 2 New York teams in a row and had 122 rushing yards in both games. Ryan Fitzpatrick had 7 carries for 65 yards against the Jets. It was the second most any Dolphin had all season. He was 1 yard off of the most, and he had 7 less carries. Against the Bengals, there was a new lead back, 2020 legend Myles Gaskin, who got 16 carries for 55 yards. In the second to last game of the season, it seemed like they had finally found a productive running back, except he got hurt and didn't play the final game. And in the infamous Week 17 game against the Patriots, Patrick ḻģeļ led the team at 21 yards on 11 carries. Finally, the worst rushing team was put out of its misery. ḻģeļ=Šōʟʟ led the team in carries with 74 and couldn't even reach 150 yards on the season. Kenyon Drake finished above him and Patrick ḻģeļ despite being traded mid-season. If you ever think your team's bad at rushing, just know it could be way worse. Oh, and I forgot to mention, Mark Walton ended up getting waived after his 4th arrest of the year. Anyways, bye.